Now let's look into the interaction part of property, plant, and equipment with other standards. As in the beginning, I told you, all the guidance, all the accounting guidance in respect of property, plant, and equipment is not only provided under IAS 16, but the accounting guidances were also provided in another standards as well. Those are specific conditions, which means which means under IAS 16, the the typical requirement for recording transaction related to property, plant, and equipments are given. However, there may be some specific transactions relating to property, plant, and equipment. And for those specific transactions, we need to look into some specific standards. So hence I quoted this learning outcome statement as interaction with other standards. As you go through the video, you will understand what do I mean. Now let's understand first instant. The first standard is IAS 23 borrowing cost. Now the concept is if you are going to construct, build, or basically you construct an eligible asset which takes substantial time for the purpose of construction, then in such a case, if you are going to incur any kind of borrowing cost, a simple example of a borrowing cost is interest. This is just an example. Then in such a case, how to account for interest in the carrying amount of property, plant, and equipment is not given under IAS 16. It is given under IAS 23, which means if an entity is going to acquire any property, plant, and equipment or construct any property, plant, and equipment, and it takes substantial time for the purpose of make the asset available for use, then in such a case, all the interest costs that are being outflowed by the entity, the accounting treatment for that will be dealt by IAS 23. The frequency of interaction specifies how much is the interaction level of IAS 23 with the IAS 16. In such a case, I classify them to be a moderate because in many of the cases, entity purchase property, plant, and equipment which are already available for use. So there is no concept of capitalizing borrowing cost. But there are very good number of entities which construct assets and which takes substantial time for getting the asset ready for use. Hence, I put it in a moderate level of interaction. Now, the second standard we talk about is the IAS 16 impairment of assets. Now, impairment means a kind of advanced depreciation, I would say. To be very simple, it's an advanced depreciation, which means you were specifying that you would be able to recover $100,000 in your books of accounts, but you would be able to recover only $80,000. Now, what's the benefit of capitalizing an asset or showing an asset or carrying an asset at an amount of $100,000 where you would be able to reap the benefit only to the tune of $80,000? Hence, the concept of impairment of assets come into picture. Third is the government grant, because sometimes what happens, any government entity or any entity provides you or you basically the entity a grant to purchase an asset, to purchase property, plant, and equipment, or donates donates property, plant, and equipment itself to the entity. Now, how to account for these transactions? How to account for these transactions? These are given under IAS 20, which means if an entity is going to acquire or going to obtain any property, plant, and equipment by way of government grant, the accounting treatment is given under IAS 20. So these are the three standards that we need to keep in mind. Let's move on to the next video where I will discuss some more standards which are applicable for property, plant, and equipment.